What if the people you trusted most were hiding deadly secrets? What if the life you built, the home you thought was safe, became the very place where your nightmare began? Brian and Beverly Mark were living the American dream. A beautiful home, successful careers, a close-knit circle of friends. But behind closed doors, they were being watched, their every move tracked, their every decision scrutinized. And when they finally got too close to a truth they were never supposed to uncover, they were silenced. On a seemingly ordinary night, they lost everything. Their home was invaded, their lives stolen, their futures erased. What at first seemed like a tragic case of robbery soon unraveled into something far more sinister, a tangled web of betrayal, power, and greed that led straight to someone they once trusted. But here's the real question. Did they ever stand a chance? Or was this crime set in motion long before they even knew they were in danger? Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we look into the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling real-life events. Our mission is to uncover the stories that shock, educate, and spark change, reminding us that behind every headline is a victim, a family, and a ripple effect felt by an entire community. If you find this journey as important as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss another gripping exploration into the depths of human behavior. On the outside, Brian and Beverly Mark had everything: love, dreams, and a future they were building together. They were the kind of couple people admired, the ones who could light up a room with their laughter and warmth. After moving into a quiet neighborhood in Graham, Pennsylvania, they were ready to settle down, carving out a life that felt like something out of a storybook. But beneath this idyllic existence, something sinister lurked. A presence, watching, waiting, calculating. On November 17, 2007, the unthinkable happened. When police arrived at their home, what they found shattered the illusion of safety. Brian and Beverly were lifeless, their bodies positioned eerily in their own home, riddled with bullets. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle. It was as if they had willingly let their executioner in. As detectives combed through the scene, one chilling question haunted them. Who would want them dead? And more disturbingly, was the killer still out there, watching? If your home, a place meant to be a sanctuary, could be infiltrated without warning, how safe are any of us really? The initial assessment of the crime scene left detectives baffled. There was no sign of forced entry, no shattered windows, no doors kicked in. Whoever had done this had either been let in voluntarily or had a way in that no one else knew about. That fact alone made the crime all the more disturbing. The bodies of Brian and Beverly Mark were found in the living room. Beverly's hand was stretched toward the coffee table, as if she had been reaching for something, or someone, before the final shot rang out. Brian's body was slumped against the couch, a look of frozen terror still etched on his face. These weren't random victims. This was personal. As officers scoured the house, something strange caught their attention. The couple's valuables, laptops, jewelry, even Brian's expensive watch, were still in place. If this had been a burglary gone wrong, why had nothing been taken? The brutality of the attack suggested rage, but the lack of theft hinted at something deeper. Friends and family were in disbelief. Brian and Beverly were well loved, with no known enemies. They were planning for their future, not running from danger. How could such a horrific crime happen to people with seemingly no dark past? But detectives knew better. Crimes like this didn't just happen. There was always a story lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Had the killer been watching them? Was this a grudge-fueled attack? Or was there a deeper, more twisted motive behind their deaths? The search for answers was only beginning. As investigators combed through the house, a small but crucial discovery set off alarm bells. A note, crumpled, partially burned, was found near the fireplace. The writing was smudged, but a few words were still legible. We know, we always knew. You should have stayed quiet. What did this mean? Who was we? And what had Brian and Beverly known that had put them in danger? The note wasn't just a clue, it was a threat. Then came the strangest part. Phone records revealed that Beverly had made a call just minutes before her death. The call had lasted only 4 seconds, just long enough to connect before being cut off. The number belonged to someone named Daniel Weaver. Daniel wasn't a family member. He wasn't a close friend. In fact, no one in their immediate circle even recognized the name. But he was about to become the focal point of the entire investigation. If Beverly had called him in her final moments, could he have the answers? And more importantly, was he involved? Daniel Weaver had a record. Nothing major. Petty theft, a couple of bar fights. But there was something about his name that made one of the officers pause. It was familiar. A quick search through old case files revealed why. 5 years earlier, Daniel had been a suspect in a missing persons case. A woman named Lisa Cartwright had vanished without a trace. The case had never been solved. Lisa had been last seen with a man described by witnesses as having the same height, build, and mannerisms as Daniel. But no charges had ever been filed. The case had gone cold. And now, here he was, connected in some way to Brian and Beverly's murders. Police needed to find him fast. What was his connection to the couple? And why had Beverly tried to reach him just before her death? Interrogations don't always start with shouting. Sometimes the most effective method is patience, letting the silence stretch long enough to make a suspect uncomfortable. And Daniel Weaver was feeling the pressure. At first, he played along, answering questions with a forced calmness. He admitted to knowing Beverly, but insisted their connection was minimal. "She called me out of nowhere," he said, feigning nonchalance. "I don't even know why." The detective across from him nodded slowly, jotting down notes, his expression unreadable. But behind the one-way mirror, a second detective observed Daniel's body language. The way his knee bounced, the way his gaze darted to the door, as if mapping out an escape route. They weren't buying it. "That's interesting," the detective said, pointing to the records. "Because it looks like you called her first, earlier that day." And the conversation lasted 10 minutes. The color drained from Daniel's face. His fingers clenched into fists on the table. Maybe I got confused," he stammered. "Or maybe," the detective interjected, "you thought we wouldn't check." The room fell into a thick silence. Then Daniel's demeanor shifted. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. His face hardened, his voice dropping into a defensive tone. "I want a lawyer." The request alone wasn't incriminating. It was his right. But the timing? That was enough to raise every red flag. As Daniel sat in silence, detectives were already moving forward. They had more than just a liar in front of them. They had a lead, and they intended to follow it to the very end. What exactly was Daniel hiding? Had he been caught up in something far bigger than himself? Or was he the mastermind behind a crime more sinister than anyone had imagined? Every murder investigation begins with a simple question: who wanted them dead? For Brian and Beverly Mark, the list of suspects was growing. At first, investigators believed Daniel Weaver was a lone wolf, someone who had become entangled with Beverly for reasons yet to be determined. But as they dug deeper, another name surfaced. A name with far more power, more influence, and more reasons to silence Brian and Beverly forever. Brian had once been involved in a high-stakes lawsuit, a fraud case that had rocked the real estate industry years prior. The defendant? Richard Holloway, a billionaire mogul with a history of making problems disappear. The case had been settled quietly, too quietly. As it turned out, Daniel Weaver wasn't just anyone. A background check revealed that before he became a name in this investigation, he had worked for a private security firm, a firm that had contracts with powerful clients, including the same law firm that once defended Richard Holloway. That couldn't be a coincidence. Brian had uncovered something that had put a target on his back. Detectives retraced Brian's final days. They checked his emails, his phone calls, his last meetings. A pattern emerged. Brian had been poking around where he shouldn't have been, asking questions about the old fraud case, reaching out to people who wanted to forget it ever happened. Then, Brian and Beverly were murdered. Was this a crime of passion? A violent twist of fate? Or was it a cover-up, a carefully orchestrated execution designed to keep a dangerous secret buried forever? And if that was the case, who else was in danger? Sometimes the smallest details unravel the biggest mysteries. For weeks, investigators had been chasing loose ends, searching desperately for the missing puzzle piece that would bring them closer to solving Brian and Beverly's brutal murders. The case had gripped the media, spreading fear and speculation like wildfire. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had the answers. Then a single phone call changed everything. A gas station attendant, unaware of the storm raging around the investigation, called in a tip. He had seen something odd the night Brian and Beverly were killed. Something that didn't make sense until now. A man had come into the store late that evening, purchasing a prepaid burner phone. He looked uneasy, glancing over his shoulder as though someone might be watching. The attendant hadn't thought much of it at the time, but when he saw Daniel Weaver's face on the news, it hit him. It was the same man. Daniel had been at that gas station the night of the murders. He had purchased a burner phone and disappeared into the night. But why? Investigators pored over phone records, tracing calls from that burner phone. What they found sent a chill through the entire team. At exactly 9:52 p.m., the precise time when Beverly made her frantic final call, Daniel had placed a call of his own. But it wasn't to Brian. It wasn't to Beverly. It was to a number linked to another disposable phone. A phone that had been deactivated just hours after the murders. A phone once registered to a man with a past even darker than Daniel's. Daniel had been working with someone, but was he following orders, or was he just another pawn in a far bigger game? The detectives now had the most pressing question of all. Who was really pulling the strings? Every thread investigators pulled led back to one name, Richard Holloway. The mere mention of his name sent ripples through the department. Holloway wasn't just another corrupt businessman. He was a figure of power, a man whose influence stretched far beyond corporate boardrooms. He had built an empire on real estate, finance, and backroom deals that never saw the light of day. He was untouchable. Years ago, Brian had been one of the few brave enough to challenge Holloway in court. He had uncovered fraudulent land deals, illegal transactions, and questionable offshore accounts. The case had been settled behind closed doors, but Brian's name had been etched into Holloway's memory, and Holloway never forgot. Had Brian stumbled upon something new? A piece of evidence that would have reopened the wounds Holloway thought had healed? That question became all too real when detectives discovered something chilling. Brian had been compiling documents again. Just days before he was murdered, Brian had started gathering information. He had been planning something, perhaps a second attempt at exposing Holloway's empire. Now, with Daniel's burner phone call leading straight to a number traced back to Holloway's office, the case had taken a sinister turn. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about silencing one man. The murders had been a message, a warning. Holloway had struck first, and unless the detectives could prove it, he would get away with it. Again, the stakes had never been higher. Investigators had spent weeks piecing together a web of lies, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder, and now they had their prime suspect, Richard Holloway, the billionaire mastermind who had orchestrated Brian and Beverly's deaths. But knowing he was responsible wasn't enough. They needed solid proof, something irrefutable, that would ensure he never walked free again. And that's where Daniel Weaver came in. "You want to save yourself?" the detective asked, sliding a document across the table. "Then help us take down the real monster." Daniel was no innocent man, but he was terrified. He knew Holloway was ruthless, that crossing him meant inviting the same fate Brian and Beverly had suffered. But Daniel also knew that if he refused, his own future would be sealed inside a prison cell for decades. After agonizing hours of negotiation, Daniel agreed to wear a wire. He would be the bait, drawing Holloway into a conversation where his arrogance would be his undoing. The meeting was set for that evening. Holloway, unaware that his empire was about to crumble, arrived at an exclusive, dimly lit lounge. He walked in with the confidence of a man who had controlled the game for years, his two ever-present bodyguards following close behind. Daniel, already seated at a private booth, forced himself to remain calm. His heart pounded, his palms damp as Holloway slid into the seat across from him. "You took care of it?" Holloway's voice was low, casual, as if they were discussing business over coffee. Daniel hesitated, his throat dry. He knew the detectives were listening, hanging on to every word. If he messed this up, he was as good as dead. "It got messy," Daniel finally said, keeping his voice steady. Holloway smirked, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Messy doesn't matter," he said coldly. "What matters is that it's done." Holloway had just confessed, without even realizing it. As he took another sip of whiskey, believing himself untouchable, the agents outside the lounge moved into position. In the next few moments, the walls of Holloway's carefully constructed empire would come crashing down. Holloway never saw it coming. The moment he stepped out of the lounge, Satisfied that his empire remained intact, officers swarmed. His bodyguards barely had time to react before they were forced to the ground, handcuffs clicking into place. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of financial fraud," the officer declared. For the first time in his life, Holloway was powerless. Meanwhile, Daniel Weaver, having played his part, was taken into protective custody. He had made a deal: testify against Holloway, and in return his sentence would be reduced. The trial was a media spectacle. Prosecutors laid out the evidence piece by piece: the burner phone records, the wiretap confession, the money trail that led straight to Holloway's accounts. Despite Holloway's high-priced legal team fighting tooth and nail to discredit the case, the evidence was damning. The jury deliberated for just a few hours before returning a verdict. Guilty. For Brian and Beverly's families, justice had been served, but it was a hollow victory. 2 innocent lives had been stolen, caught in a game of greed and corruption. Even with Holloway behind bars, questions lingered. Had there been more victims, more crimes buried beneath layers of power and deception? Because if there was one thing the case had proven, it was this: some of the deadliest criminals don't wear masks. They wear tailored suits and sign deals in boardrooms. And the scariest part, there are still more out there, hiding in plain sight. The deaths of Brian and Beverly Mark were not just a tragedy. They were a warning. A warning about the hidden dangers lurking beneath polished facades, about the secrets people carry, and about the chilling reality that sometimes those we trust the most are the ones who can destroy us. Their case wasn't just about a home invasion gone wrong. It was about power, betrayal, and a conspiracy that ran far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Justice in the end came, but at what cost? 2 lives lost, a family shattered, and the lingering question that no court ruling could ever answer: how many more secrets remain buried? Cases like this remind us that evil doesn't always come in the form of a masked intruder. Sometimes it wears a suit, sometimes it shakes your hand, and sometimes it watches and waits until the perfect moment to strike. But we can learn from these stories. We can pay attention to the warning signs, listen to the red flags, and never turn a blind eye to the truth. If this case shook you, if it made you rethink the very nature of trust and deception, then don't let Brian and Beverly's story fade into the background. Let it be a reminder that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about vigilance. What do you think? Could this happen again? Could someone else be walking into a similar trap right now? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking true crime cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people around you. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous enemies aren't strangers. They're the ones standing right beside you.